Hello, my name is Erica Ebelhair, and I am a second-year law student at Penn State Law, and am participating in the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For one of the lab's projects, Witnesses to Herstory, we are capturing women's personal experiences in education, sports, and the workforce, focusing on the 1950s through the 1970s. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Grethe Cammermeyer. Dr. Cammermeyer has served as chief nurse of the Washington National Guard, was the highest-ranking military official to challenge the military's anti-homosexual policies, and continues to be an advocate of public health and LGBTQ+ issues. Welcome, Dr. Cammermeyer.
Thank you, Erica.
Now, as your achievements demonstrate, you've dedicated many years of service in the United States military, but you actually emigrated here from Norway in 1951. How do you think moving to a new country at the age of 9 had an impact on your childhood?
Well, I was totally lost, to say the least. And I don't think when you make a move as drastic as we did, that you feel a sense of continuity with your roots. And I think for me, that was probably the most difficult thing in trying to find out who I was and where I belonged. And I remember feeling that for years until after our immigration, my first time back to Norway, and then feeling, oh, this is why I feel different and don't really blend in the way I would have expected that others, other kids my age seem to be, in a different mindset than I was.
Mm-hmm. And what about going back to Norway helped you feel kind of more like yourself?
Well, I think some of the idiosyncrasies that I had as a youngster and as a young adult, of feeling, I think, well, I don't know how you say that you don't feel like you fit in.
Mm-hmm.
I did things that were probably a part of my cultural upbringing in terms of like opening the door for somebody and sort of deferring to them. And you don't know whether that's because you're a woman, because you're different in other ways, or if you're an immigrant. But my return to Norway was very significant for me in terms of I think my first part of finding self.
Good. Happy to hear that. Do you remember any noticeable differences between your time in Norway and your time in the United States as a child?
That's hard to say because I was so young at the time. And the first thing, of course, was learning how to speak English and how to communicate. And one of the not silly but naive things we were living in Washington, D.C., where it's hot and humid and muggy, as you might relate to. And when I was walking to school, I would feel this heat and everything. And I would take a cool leaf, in the mornings. I would take a leaf and I'd put it over my eyes, and it would be cooling, and couldn't understand why when I was so swollen when I came home that, nobody in my family knew what was going on, but I had been cooling myself with poison ivy leaves. And I kept on doing that from time to time over the years. But I mean, it's, those little nuances of things.
Yeah. Now, who lived in your home with you growing up?
I immigrated with my parents and 2 brothers at the time, and I was the eldest.
Okay. What was your relationship like with your brothers?
With my brothers, I think there was probably a bit of jealousy because at least my first brother is about 2.5 years younger than I, and he just seemed to get more attention, and it turned out he did because he was more sickly. But you don't think about that when you're a kid. You just see that there's a distribution. And I remember also feeling that, because he had a penis, that somehow he was treated differently. And
Mhm.
it's just something I remember thinking, but it wasn't that I wanted one. I just wanted, the equal treatment.
Mhm. Other than him being sickly, as you say, do you know what prompted you to feel that there was a difference in treatment?
Well, looking back and after reading my father's early genealogy, he described himself as having three children, and by that time I had another brother. So my brothers were considered his children because they carried his name and would throughout,
Mhm.
and I didn't. And so I think there was always a little bit of a sense of not having the same uh, value in my father's eyes. That
Mhm.
changed over the years, but during the growing up time, it felt that way.
Mhm. As a child, did you feel that your parents treated you differently from your brothers?
Not really. I mean, and I'm not sure if my perception now, looking back, is real, or if it's you analyze things over the year and you put the pieces together, and why is it that you had to, it's like it's hard to describe. Uh, I don't think that my parents treated us differently. I think my father was patriarchal, and his worldview was the way we behaved. And anytime there would be something that I might want to do, the answer would always be no,
Mhm.
and without explanation. And I think that ultimately altered the way I uh, treated respectfully all of the people with whom I worked while I was in the military, and also how I treated my children, in the sense that for him, essentially anything was no,
Mhm.
if it was something that we had wanted to do. And what I consciously have always said uh, to myself in terms of when the kids ask to do something that might be a little bit out of the ordinary, I would say, why not? And if I didn't have a good reason for the why not, then we would go ahead and do whatever they had on their mind. And I think that's really a healthy way of treating other people also. Can you help? Why not?
Mhm. So would you say your parents' parenting style shaped how you raised your own children?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. No question about it. And for that matter, my parents, coming from Europe, my parents' relationship with one another and my mother's subservient role had a profound effect in what I was not going to have in my relationship when I married a man. When I agreed to marry, I remember clearly uh, feeling that I was going to lose me.
Mhm.
And so I gave up me to get married. And I didn't find me again until after I divorced.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll definitely want to talk about your first marriage later, but for now, I am curious, when you say your mother had a subservient role, can you expand on what you mean by that?
Well, she was educated as a nurse in Norway, so she had that in terms of a background. But when uh, until my father had a heart attack when he was a, a bit older, my mother did not know how to write a check.
Mhm.
She got at that time $25 a month, and that was to take care of all of the expenses in the house. That she deferred to my father and really had no personal and social life for herself for many years uh, after we immigrated to the United States. Now, it's hard to say whether that was solely because of being immigrants and having to sort of establish community, but it always felt as though she had not come into her own until at beginning, at least until after I graduated from high school.
Mhm. So it sounds like your mother was responsible for most of the housekeeping and those kinds of household chores.
Yes.
Mhm. And do you know, other than that $25 stipend, if she could access your father's and hers money?
I never saw, well, they never talked money, because in those days you don't talk money, politics, or religion. And so that was never included. But it wasn't until a bit later, after we'd been in the United States for a while, that she began knitting sweaters, Norwegian sweaters, and selling those. And then subsequently, she was also an artist, doing silk screening and selling fabric and patterns to the garment industry in New York. So, but these are little subtle little changes that came over time. But no, she never had resources or access.
Mhm. Switching gears now a little bit to talk about your early education. You mentioned earlier that you didn't know English when you came to the United States. How was it to deal with learning a new language while also trying to go to school?
I don't think you consciously think about it uh, as much as that you begin to absorb a language and learn words and things. So I don't think that I felt particularly deprived that, and thinking about it, there's some things that are just good not to even know what people are saying. But it took a while for me, and I was able to do like mathematics without any difficulties. And but I remember as time went on, I needed classic comic books to be able to understand sort of the nuances of certain classic books and things that we were reading. And so having those classic comic books made it that you could read the text and see the pictures, and that helped, I think, in sort of my learning process, if you will. And because I was a tall Norwegian kid, even though I didn't speak English and needed ultimately to have an English tutor, I was so tall that the schools felt that it was going to be in my best interest to skip fourth grade and go into fifth, so I would be as tall as everybody else. So they didn't use emotional stability or maturity or how you would communicate as a parameter of whether or not you should sort of stay with your peer group. And so I was moved up into the fifth grade, and we ended up moving in terms of the community also. And I think all of those things made it a little bit difficult because I think I was, emotionally immature and naive, to say the least.
You remember how you felt when you were transferred up a grade?
No, I mean, it just was what it was, because, and I think you have to put into the perspective that I didn't have a cohort that I had been going to school with, so it wasn't like I was losing friends. And because that move took place when we also physically moved from one school to another, it just was what it was. And I think it took years to figure out, if I'd taken fourth grade, I would have learned XYZ in terms of English grammar, in terms of state history and those sorts of things. And, you don't know that at the time.
Do you recall what you wanted to do when you first started school?
I had always wanted to be a physician. And not that I wanted to emulate my father, but because medicine was in the family. I mean, I had two grandfathers that were physicians. I had cousins who were physicians or going to be studying that. I had my mother was a nurse, so it was inherent that somehow I was going to go into healthcare. And so being a physician was what my plan had been as long as I can remember. But going on to college, there was a freedom that I experienced that had a profound impact on my academic scholarship. And I almost flunked out of college and realized that, I was just not going to be able to do the diligence of pre-med. And so ended up going, I was going to quit college, and my mother said, well, that's a good idea. You can go and wash test tubes at NIH for the rest of your life. And that didn't seem particularly like a career that I wanted. And so I transferred into nursing, but felt horrible about it because nursing at the time also was a very subservient profession. And, thinking that, if you were in the nurse's station, you had to stand up and relinquish your chair to the physician, who was usually a male. And, it was not in high esteem in terms of a profession. And I think that was, one of the driving forces for me, that when I heard about the Army Student Nurse Program, that it really afforded me an opportunity to combine the profession with something that was meaningful, and that was to join the military and sort of give something back to the country that we had immigrated to, and also to make nursing seem like there was, it had meaning. And over the years, my concept of all of that has certainly just evolved, as I had continued my education and experiences that I've had in so many different arenas.
Other than you wanting a meaningful career, was there anything else that prompted you to join the Army Corps while you were in college?
Money. Having them pay for my schooling was because I was paying for it myself. My parents, my father particularly, didn't realize that in the United States you had to pay for your schooling. You couldn't. It wasn't funded in the same way that it was in Europe when he was going to school, and so there was never a question of whether or not I was going to go to college. It was just sort of elusive of how I was going to do it. And when the Army Student Nurse Program was something that I learned about, it was, well, this seems like an ideal fit, and it was. I ended up spending 31 years in the military, so it must have been okay.
So when you made that decision in 1961 to join the Army Corps, how did your family and friends respond to that?
Well, my parents, had no negative feelings at all about it, but their friends, because this was not that long after World War II, and women had sort of gotten a bad rap for making the assumption that any woman who was in the military had, a secondary reason for being there. Either they were whores, or they wanted a husband, or they were lesbian. They couldn't have the same, feeling of patriotism as a man. And so there was a lot of negative vibes sent out post World War II to get, I think, women to get back into the house and do the kids and food and all sorts of things. So their friends were very concerned about me joining the military. I mean, little did they know. But besides that, they supported my move to do that, and I don't think ever had any second thoughts about it.
So you don't think they let their friends' more negative opinions influence them?
No, because I was born and raised under Nazi occupation in Norway. My parents were part of the Norwegian underground. So understanding what patriotism and what serving your country one way or another was like, they understood that part of it as based on their own experience. And so they also knew that I needed to make my own decisions and build my own path for the future. And I think also being naive immigrants in some regards was also good for them and good for me.
Mm-hmm. Moving back to some of your early education, did you enjoy school generally?
Not to my recollection.
No.
No, I was not a bookworm. Um, no, I don't think I ever developed really good study habits. I was not brilliant, although I perceived myself to be, because I passed and I didn't study much. And that, came back to bite me when I went to college, and, it was a whole different, different mindset and work ethic. And, no, you're just not going to float through without putting some effort into it.
Right. Were there any classes maybe that you enjoyed more than the others?
Well, early on, it was math because obviously I couldn't really participate in the others. But as I went on, I really enjoyed the microbiology, zoology, the things that one would expect if you're going into the healthcare arena. And so it was a fit. It never felt as though it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. And did you participate in any sort of extracurricular activities at school?
Well, in high school, I was very involved in sports and ended up as president of the Girls Athletic Association. And it was, those were the old days,
Mhm.
and I also actually was on a semi-professional softball team, traveling around the East Coast for 2 or 3 years, and but by today's standard, it was so different. Uh, because, for example, in basketball, women could only bounce the ball 3 times, and then you couldn't cross the center line. You had to throw the ball into the other side of the court, because women shouldn't be running, because that would mean that they wouldn't be able to have children, which was, of course, their only reason for being.
Mhm.
There was no Title IX or anything for equal sports opportunities, and so it was, you were glad for whatever sports you could find, that you could participate in. And my main ones were basketball and softball at the time.
Do you happen to remember what other sports were available for female students?
Well, this was on the East Coast, and the East Coast and West Coast are a little bit different. I think we had tennis and badminton and volleyball, and soccer, the beginning of or hockey, field hockey. But it was just something to fill in your PE time when you
Mhm.
were in school, and the emphasis has changed so dramatically now. We're season ticket holders to the
Mhm.
Storm team here in the Seattle area, and to watch them, it's just remarkable. It's such a joy to see them have the opportunity to really excel. And you can't help but wonder, gee, I wonder if would if you know 60 years ago, those same opportunities would have been there for me. Could I have been an effective ball player? And so you think about that, but you also see how wonderful those opportunities are now. I have a niece, no, I mean, two granddaughters who are really excelling in volleyball. One is in college on a full ride scholarship, and the other is in elementary school on a select team.
Mhm.
And to see how they play and their drive and their opportunity is just delightful. And so, of course, I'm very proud of them.
Mhm. So, despite not having many opportunities yourself, you think the growth has been very positive.
Oh, how could it not? I mean, what I remember my sons, as they were growing up and were involved in sports also, uh, the camaraderie and the discipline and you know what you are not exposed to in the same way in terms of drugs and alcohol and things like that. It really keeps them um, sort of in check in a time when the world can just go nuts and have no values at all. So I'm very grateful for sports.
During either elementary or high school, do you remember having a school uniform or a dress code you had to abide by?
In no, when I was in the only thing was those really weird PE outfits where you that was like in high school and in sports. But then, when I was in my junior year of college, as a student nurse, you were in a student nurse uniform, and that felt, you really feel like tough shit. But then, joining the military, it was being in uniform, and then you all of a sudden become 2 feet taller, and there is a sense of pride with that comes with that, which is actually quite good for the ego.
Mhm. So you actually liked having a uniform.
Well, if you think about it, you don't have to decide what you're going to wear. Everything, it's already there, it's hanging, it's ready to go, and you just don't have to worry.
Mhm.
And those tough decisions of what to put on in the morning can be exhausting.
Mhm. During your time in high school, which I believe was 1956 to 1960, do you recall taking any classes that only were required for female students?
Yeah, it was actually 56 to 59. And because the schools in those days were like 6, 3, and 3.
Okay.
And women had physical education, that were separate, but also we had home economics, and there was the cooking part of it, and then there was the sewing part of it.
Mhm.
And so you never learned to pick up a hammer or use a chainsaw or anything like that. And I think that was sort of annoying. The last thing I wanted to do was to learn how to sew. And cooking was not anything I was particularly interested in.
Mhm.
But I mean, you learn these things, and it's good. And nowadays, the fact that men can, or young men can have those classes also is also good.
Were the male students at that time taking something like shop that women or female students were excluded from?
Yeah, exactly. They had their shop and auto work and things, and I don't think the expectation was that we as women could lift the hood or change a tire. Because we were really considered, I guess, second-class citizens, and to be cared for rather than to be treated egalitarianly and as equal parts of any society.
Mhm. How did you feel about that view?
I was not keen on it. And so took opportunities to, which is why, playing semi-pro softball, learning how to drive a car, joining the military was, sort of stepping out of typical female roles and wanting to see who I was and what I was able to do. And I think each step of the way, as I matured over time, you grow into it. But I think, as I look back, if we had similar opportunities when we were younger, to stand up and speak out, and we would have been probably as radical as today's young people are, and that would have felt better, I think, in the long run, because over the years, even while I was in the military and had to challenge some things that were going on in the military regarding my patient care or myself, it was intimidating. And then when I challenged the military's anti-gay policy, yeah, that was intimidating also. But feeling like at that time it was something I had to do because it was the right thing to do.
Right.
I think I sort of deflected from your question, but
Oh, that's okay. Now, returning to your college years briefly, you discussed earlier that you were reluctant to pursue nursing at first. Was that just personally for you? You didn't want to be a nurse, or did you also kind of take in that view that nursing was inferior to being a doctor?
Oh, absolutely. It was inferior, subordinate to being a physician. And I mean, that persisted for years and years, even during my time when I was in the military. And you're able to do things in the military that you don't necessarily do in civilian life. But in Vietnam, I was head nurse for 8 months of a neurosurgical intensive care unit, where we rarely saw the neurosurgeons because they were operating, but still things had to happen in terms of patient care and decisions to be made. And the surgeons would come back from surgery and say, well, what do we need to write to catch up with what you've already done?
Mm-hmm.
Coming back from that type of clinical situation to the States and having to ask for permission to give a pain pill, a Tylenol or a suppository. I mean, it was so humiliating. And again, feeling really subservient. And now, the difference between what we've been talking about and this, that has to do with the profession itself. Mm-hmm. And state laws governing what nurses can do under which circumstances and things like this. And one of the reasons why I continued on to become both a nurse practitioner and get my doctorate in nursing. But it was, I think, the compounding of being a female nurse after Vietnam and what we were able to do over there as compared to stateside, were all things that make you feel subservient, both intellectually and humanly. But as I say, that part of that is professional differences rather than just gender differences.
Right. When did you start to feel that the nursing profession wasn't subservient to physicians?
Well, probably not until I had gotten my master's and was a nurse practitioner, but at the same time, that when you think about what the role of each of those professions are, and early on, it was all female. Nurses were virtually all female, and it was like, if it was a male nurse, he must be queer. And, so there was something, curious about a male nurse. But we didn't feel that way about a male physician. We didn't feel that way about a female physician versus male. So that our whole conception of gender versus profession was all screwed up because it was so yeah, I don't know how to describe it, but it was a strange time. And fortunately, that has changed as the nursing profession has become really on parity in some ways with medicine, depending on what the educational background is, but also that there are different roles that each serves. And I think it's for the good of patient care ultimately.
Yeah. Earlier, we discussed your decision to join the Army Corps. Were those motivators the same for why you decided to stay after graduating in 1963?
Well, the reason for joining was that I was combining nursing as a wimpish profession with the military, which was, had meaning and power and a reason for being. And all of those things were fulfilled in my estimation for me during my career in the military. I was obligated for 3 years after 2 years of educational support, and really loved the military, loved the discipline, not having to make decisions, not just about what I was wearing, but where I was going. I had options in terms of applying for various either specialty area or places where I could be assigned. Mm-hmm. And the other really interesting thing about the military was that it was extremely egalitarian, so how you were treated and how you advanced in the military was based on how you did your job. It was not based on gender. It was equal pay for equal service and rank and all of that, so that it was the most equal type of opportunity you had as a woman. And I think the VA has a similar model in terms of being able to get promoted within the system based on the work that you do, the education that you have, and not based on gender. Mm-hmm. And I ended up actually spending 7 years in the military on active duty, and was only forced to leave because they had a rule that women couldn't be married at first, and then women couldn't have children. So I was forced to leave because of having children. I had gotten married, so coming back from Vietnam, realizing that we were starting a family and had to leave. That so that broke my career trajectory. But once the policy changed, I was able to go back into the reserve forces, and then worked also at the VA. So I was government owned in every aspect of my careers. I mean, in all of my active nursing, I was probably 9 months was the only the amount of time that I spent in a civilian hospital.
Well, since you brought up your first marriage, I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. I know you met in 1965. Can you tell me more about how you and your former husband met originally?
We met in 64 on a blind date,
Mm.
and then dated for a year, and got married. And I outranked him, which his buddies teased him a lot about. And I didn't take advantage of it in the way that I probably should have. And so we were both in the military and on active duty in Germany. And then it was the beginning of the Vietnam buildup, and we came back to the United States, to Fort Lee, Virginia, and then his unit got orders for Vietnam, and so I requested being sent to Vietnam also, and was granted that, got orders for Vietnam. His orders were canceled, and mine were not, so I ended up going over earlier, and 3 months later, his unit was transferred over also.
Okay. We'll definitely return to your time in Vietnam. But for now, I was gonna stick with your marriage for a little bit more. Had you wanted to get married before meeting your husband?
No, I was not, marriage was just never part of my plan for my future. And when I met Harvey, and I was telling Mother about him, and then he proposed, my mother said that, maybe this would be the only opportunity I would have. And of course, there were certain roles that women had. You went to school, you got a job, then you got married, then you didn't have a job, and then you raised, then you lost yourself. And so it took, several days for me to decide that, well, maybe I should. And so I did. But I remember vividly feeling that, by getting married, I would lose me.
Mhm.
And that did happen.
Yeah.
And but I mean, we did not have, it was a good marriage until it wasn't.
Mhm.
And until I had some doubts about a lot of things. And so we had 4 sons, one of whom has since died. And yeah, so it wasn't an atypical marriage. I don't think. We sort of isolated ourselves after Vietnam and built a mini farm and stayed isolated, probably a little Vietnam type isolated, or COVID isolated,
Mm.
and then divorced after 15 years.
Yeah. So would you say your motivation for getting married was social pressure more so than personal preference?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
And you have to put this in the context of the early 60s, where there wasn't we didn't have a television, and so you didn't know what family mixes were. You only knew what you knew in terms of your own original family of origin structure. And so I would, I was extremely naive about everything, including sex and myself and sexuality, and some things just never came up in conversations. But realizing that I was really unhappy and actually suicidal, and got some help and decided that I needed to leave my marriage.
Mhm. How did you, obviously you weren't feeling your best at that time. How did you feel knowing that your relationship was causing you that pain?
Well, I think what you realize is that you need to get out of the situation that you're in. And even though you can't explain things, and when you think, looking back, it's like, the difficulty having to do with the kids. I had 4 kids. We had a gorgeous place and everything, and I was breaking all of that up. So there was a lot of guilt associated with it, but the alternative that I was feeling at the time meant that I really had to do this. And so it was probably the most painful time in my life.
Mhm. Looking now at your experience with your children, how did you find out you were pregnant with your first son?
Nausea, not wanting to eat. I mean, it was intentional because by that time there were birth control pills for women, and had decided that we wanted to start a family because we were in Vietnam, living together, and decided that since my husband was going to get out of the military, that maybe this would be the best way for me to get out also, because women couldn't have dependents. And so it really was not getting a period and feeling nauseated. So being in Vietnam also was that I wanted to be extremely careful that I no longer took the malaria pills, and I did not get any x-rays and some of the routine treatment that you were supposed to have before leaving country to come back to the United States. I just didn't want to jeopardize anything.
Right. Had you been taught either at school or during your time as a nurse how to recognize the signs of pregnancy?
Well, I had a course in OB, but that hardly makes you an expert. It is a lived experience, and because it was planned, it was anticipated that it would happen, and so the signs were there, and figured it out.
Yeah. Did your OB give you what you would now consider good advice on how to handle the pregnancy?
Well, in Vietnam, there were not exactly OB physicians. I had some physician friends who advised me, and they were the ones who said, not to do some of the routine things we were supposed to do before coming back to the States. And so it wasn't until I came back and was reassigned to a local military hospital that I actually came under the advice of OB care.
And would you say the advice you received was helpful in having your first pregnancy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I knew nothing. They knew a little more, even though they were men. And, so, yeah, I think that's a awkward question to, I mean, I did fine. The baby did fine. He was born in a military hospital. And my role changed, and I had been booted out of the military 6 weeks before he was born, because you couldn't have a dependent, or as a military person, you couldn't have a child born on active duty, because then the child would become a ward of the government, and they would have to pay you to raise him, which I tried, but it didn't quite work that way. So there were many changes that took place because of that, both in my role in the family and losing my career, and yet, he was a wanted kid.
Yeah. Despite wanting him, how did it feel to lose all your career aspects, essentially, because you wanted to have this child?
I think, I think every time you have a major change like that. It's not unlike being becoming retired from the military, the VA, from nursing, whatever it is, that you have to redefine yourself. Who are you now? And do you have any value? Can you pull out from your experiences of the past to become a new you, or how do you remold yourself so that you have that sense of meaning? And I've done that a number of times. I mean, I did it after I got out of the military, and then when I went back into the military, when the policies changed, when I retired from the military, retired from the VA, I found other things to be able to utilize my skill set, because egotistically, it's like I had much too much knowledge and experience to just let it go to start reading a novel and not go anywhere further than that. And I think that is what one ends up doing, is looking for meaning in life, meaning in what you can do as a human being, and how you can contribute to the world, in however big that world is.
After leaving the military the first time, did you think you were going to find your way back someday?
No, I didn't realize that there was sort of active involvement of organizations and individuals that wanted to change the policy. And as more and more women were in the military, there were more and more women leaving the military because of this existing policy that women couldn't have children and be in the military. At the same time, men had children and could be in the military. So what's the difference? And so there were years of trying to figure out how to take care of the child if the parents were deployed. And so they, for years, they modified that as time went on. But when the policy changed for me 4 years after my discharge, I went back only into the reserves at that time, so that we could still maintain our home and wouldn't be uprooted, especially in those years where I was in, where you did not have the mobilization of reserve forces the way we did, for the 20 years in Afghanistan. So it was a delightful surprise to me, because I always felt more that I was a contributing person, and I was myself when I was in the military and in uniform. So I was delighted with that opportunity.
Good. Returning now to your military career, what was it like to serve in a country like Vietnam, where there was an active war going on?
Well, as an Army nurse, it's where I was supposed to be. And I had volunteered when my husband was on orders, because I didn't want to sit home waiting for that knock on the door type of a thing. And it was, we still had that sense of, if you go to Vietnam, you're going to die, because there were so many casualties at the time. But, I wanted to be there if he was going to be there. And, and as a nurse, there was no place better to be. And I volunteered the first time, and then I extended so that my husband and I would come back at the same time. And I would have gone back again if I was ordered to, but I would not have volunteered a second time, because it was a hardship time. And coming back, just as today, as folks come back from being deployed, you really have a schism between, dealing with life and death and war situations over there, and suddenly coming back, and you have a society that is only on the periphery of understanding what was going on over there, not unlike what's happening in Israel and with the Palestinians today. It's like we see the horror, but we have no concept of what their experience is like, other than beyond imagination in terms of horror.
Ultimately, you received a Bronze Star for your service in Vietnam, and by 1988, you were Chief Nurse of Washington National Guard. Clearly, those are no small feats. Did you always see yourself obtaining those higher leadership positions within the military?
I don't think when you're in the military that you are seeking a higher position necessarily. In my earlier years, in my delusion of grandeur, I had wanted to be a general, because there were no female generals in the Army Nurse Corps. And so, you think, well, maybe I could be the first Army Nurse General. And, by the time you spend 20 years or so in the military, there are other people who have become generals, and you just do the best job that you can, and you grow with each opportunity and experience that you have. So I think, in terms of, well, is this true? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm saying is true, because because as time went on in the military, the thing was, I wanted to be a general. And even then, and that's what made it so that I applied for a top secret clearance, so I could go to the War College, so I could be competitive for a general's role, and so I could go to the Pentagon, et cetera, et cetera. So all things being equal, yeah, I had, I was wanting to move up because I also felt as though I had an experience that I could offer, and that might make life easier for the people coming behind. And that really was what I guess one could say that was my downfall, because by applying for a top secret clearance, by this time I'd been divorced for a number of years, and was in the doctoral program finishing up my doctorate. And then one would say, and then I met this woman and realized, sort of had my aha moment that I was a lesbian. And that was, being homosexual was incompatible with military service, according to the military, even though there are thousands of gays and lesbians serving in the military in those times. And so having come to that personal identity of self-identification, and then deciding I was going to try to apply for the top secret clearance in the War College, then I was went through an investigation and told my truth. And with that, ultimately was discharged from the military, challenged my discharge, won, and went back in the military. And curiously, after I returned to the military, and the world knew that I was a homosexual in the military, and the world did not fall apart, and the military did not fall apart, I was contacted by my unit and said, Colonel, you meet all of the requirements to be a general officer. So we want to get your permission to send your packet forward. And I was stunned, to say the least, because I'd just been through 4 years 4 years of challenging the military's anti-gay policy, thrown out, came back in. And I thought of that song, I think it's Willie Nelson saying, "Take this job and shove it." I said, no, I don't think so. I think don't send my packet forward. I was done, and didn't think that I was going to be able to achieve anything, and it's better to withdraw from the table than being thrown out. So I mean, I again sort of deflected from where we originally started, but yeah, so I had wanted to be a general. When I had the opportunity to try, I backed down.
How did it feel to, I guess, let go of that thing you'd been chasing for a decent time?
Well, are you thinking in just after they asked if I wanted my packet sent forward? I'd had 4 years of being disillusioned, because my belief system throughout all of these years had been that the military took care of its own. And I had given everything that I could in terms of time and service and whoever I was. And so it felt as though I had been betrayed by my discharge. And at the same time, realizing that I had to challenge this policy so that others would have an opportunity to serve. And again, thinking that my case would make a difference. And well, it may in some regard because of the movie, but at the same time, there were thousands of people who have been discharged before and after, and that I thought that I had a unique opportunity because I was older. I was already a colonel. I'd already served for 25 years in the military. And how dangerous could I be? I had a family. I had, 4 sons, and admitted that I was a lesbian. So how dangerous could I be? And I really needed to continue to challenge the policy, hoping that it would change. Now, I won, but in return, we ended up with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And for 17 years, lobbied and fought for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I think probably the highlight of everything, maybe we shouldn't get there yet, but the highlight of everything was at the signing of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, being asked to lead the Pledge of Allegiance, because of the 300 some people of us who were there. It was the first time in 17 years that it felt as though that pledge applied to us also.
I am going to go through some of those moments again, just so we can get in more detail, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. Now, as you've alluded to, in 1989, you, during a security clearance interview, said you were a lesbian and were discharged from the military. And you've said that you decided to bring suit because, you thought it would help people after you. But how did it feel to challenge essentially the monolith that is the US military?
Oh, when I was told I was going to be discharged, because the investigator had reported to my command that I was going to be discharged, I was devastated and had absolutely no idea what to do, where to come. I knew that I couldn't fight the military myself because I was still in it. And so then it was, where do you begin when you know nothing about the legal system? You have no idea that there is a defense group and a prosecuting group, even within the military. And so I didn't know that there was anybody else who had done this sort of thing, come to find out, of course, there's a whole litany of folks who had challenged the military policy, and some had succeeded. But I was totally at a loss, and then ended up interviewing a couple of attorneys in companies, but realizing I could never afford their services. I mean, I was a working mom, essentially, and serendipitously ended up hearing about Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund at the time, and through all sorts of peculiar ways ended up being in contact with them, and also through the military law task force out of San Diego. They were the ones that I was first able to talk to somebody that understood what the policies were. And Kathy Gilbert at the time there said, don't say anything more to anybody. Refer them to me. And it was like this huge burden was lifted, because I had no idea what I was doing or how we were, how I would proceed with the challenge. And so through the Military Law Task Force, then Lambda Legal Defense, then the Northwest Women's Law Center, now the Legal Voices here in Washington, and Perkins Coie. I mean, I had a team of attorneys, and I felt like, well, here I was the puppet, and everybody was working around, pumping me for questions having to do with the military and my career and stuff. And but the world went on around me, and it was overwhelming. And Mary Newcomb, who was my primary attorney out of Lambda, and asked me, she said, if you go forward with this, there's going to be a lot of propaganda. There's going to be a lot of people interested in the case, and are you willing and able to take all of that on? So she was very aware of the impact that would have on me personally, because she'd been through it with another client, Dusty Pruitt. And it was and I met with Mary and with Diane and Dusty Pruitt, and we had dinner together, and I asked Dusty, I said, would you do this again if you had to? And she said, absolutely. So I was getting the reinforcement that the people who had been involved, even though they may not have succeeded immediately, that this was so important that we really had to continue to move forward. But it was very lonely. It was very intimidating, and it was humiliating in a way, because I come from a background of sexual naivety, and all of a sudden people are going to know that I'm a homosexual, and it had a connotation that you spend your whole life in bed, rather than that you have a life and you just happen to have sort of an emotional connection with somebody of the same gender rather than opposite gender. And so it was a very peculiar and lonely time. And then I had to come out to my kids, and were they going to want to have anything to do with me? And so there were on so many levels. And then in addition to that, with the notoriety, if I was going to take it on, was I going to lose my job in the VA? So I had to talk to my boss in the VA. I had to deal with my patients. I had several hundred clients because I ran a seizure clinic and a sleep lab. And all of those folks were going to know stuff that they didn't need to know. And so there was a lot of stress, to say the least. but I had just and I knew nothing about the legal system at the time. And I think that's really the most that I got out of everything was this respect that I ended up having for attorneys and the work that they do and how important they are. And obviously I couldn't have done it without them because they were the ones that did it. And I was just the person that the case that they were walking through.
Mm-hmm. Well, after 4 years of stress and anxiety and loneliness, in 1994, you did win your case. So how did that feel to at least know you have won your personal battle?
Well, it was a little mixed, winning the case after all of this, because it was one for me, but by that time, Don't Ask, Don't Tell had also been implemented. And so I won, and curiously, the judge said, you're now, we are sort of rescinding your discharge, but you are still governed under Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Mm-hmm.
So the world knows that I'm a queer, and yet I'm not supposed to let anybody know that I am. And we had a book that was just coming out called Serving in Silence. There was the movie with Glenn Close, Serving in Silence, and I was now governed under Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Right.
So, it was a little bizarre. And I was doing a lot of university talks and everything. And it was like, I cannot tell you that I am a lesbian because I'm governed under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But of course, everybody knew. And so it was sort of this ironic situation.
Mm-hmm. Can you briefly explain what the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was?
Okay. Prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell being made a law, homosexuality was ruled incompatible by regulation. So it was sort of self-governed by regulation that homosexuality was incompatible with military service. And as a result, if you were found out or somebody ratted on you, then you could be discharged for just who you were.
Mm-hmm.
And my case ended up, I think, causing a lot of discussion in both the political arena and the legal arena and the military arena. And part of it was because of my rank, but part of it was because of the movie also. And so Bill Clinton, who was then the candidate for president, was trying to negotiate to do away, and had said that he would do away with the ban against gays serving in the military. And Sam Nunn says, that's not going to happen on my watch. He was president of the chairperson of the Senate Armed Service Committee. And so ultimately what was decided was that, well, gays could serve in the military, but they could not let anybody know that they were, because that would be sort of equivalent to conduct, which would be incompatible with military service. So you could serve in the military, you couldn't let anybody know, you couldn't get married, and that was, mostly overseas anyhow. And so you were and nobody could ask if you were also. So you were supposed to live in this bubble, go to work, but not talk about anything about your personal life and anything else. And during those 17 years, we had 14,000 gays and lesbians were discharged from the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Mm-hmm. So it really didn't do much other than making people feel, well, I can at least hide and lie and still be in the military. And so when President Obama and the Congress at the time decided that, they were losing too much, and sign and had the repeal, then life changed for members in the service. But it did not include trans service members, because trans is you can't do that in a soundbite. And even in the gay community, there was this shunning. I felt a shunning of the trans community and individuals because we didn't understand it. I mean, we were just beginning to understand the difference between drag queens and transvestites and homosexual and bisexual. And I mean, we were just beginning to talk about it as a society. And then you throw trans folk in, who have a whole different journey that they have to take. And so they were not included. And but I think, right now there is a political backlash against anything that isn't, Jesus Christ. And so it's a very difficult time for even those of us who are married to a same-sex partner. And, we're going to have legal battles from, reading a book. And, so it's yeah, I digress.
As you mentioned earlier, you actually led the Pledge of Allegiance at that signing ceremony to overturn Don't Ask, Don't Tell. What was the experience like to have seen that policy from its inception to its end?
Well, I think all of us who had been involved in that effort felt a vindication that, it was for the right reason. All of what we have done and worked on was for the common good, and we won. And it was, we were speechless in many ways, and teary and ecstatic. And I remember one young captain coming up to me after the ceremony and thanking me for my efforts, and saying, now I no longer have to choose between my love and my job. And that sort of says it all in terms of opportunities. And over the years now, I mean, I've had so many lesbian friends who have become general. And when we see one another, it's like, you did it. It's just really great. And they say thank you to me for my efforts at the time. But again, it's like I get a lot of credit just because of people like Barbara Streisand and Glenn Close and folks being involved in my case. But I was just the symbol of the thousands of others who lobbied and worked hard on all of these efforts to overturn the law.
After Don't Ask, Don't Tell was overturned in 2010, did it feel easier to be queer? Did it change kind of your perception?
Well, I had, after everything that we had been through, it really, we were older, we were out of the mainstream, we were not involved, and so we just continued to live our lives as everyday people in society. I think the fun part is, that people may remember or read a book or get contacted by the University of Pennsylvania or something out of the history of it as much as anything else. But on a personal level, it didn't feel any different. But I also had spent 4 years on DACLWITS, which is the Defense Advisory Council on Women in the Services, an advisory group to the Secretary of Defense. on women's issues in the military. And what was really wonderful was being able to, as a lesbian, speaking out on behalf of the gay community when issues of how the military treated women in the service, and also the lesbians needed to be included in part of the conversations because they have a different need. So it was important, I think, to be able to continue to work for advocacy, and also to be a representative of the gay community.
Several times you've used the word we instead of I. Is that you referencing your spouse, Diane, when you say we?
Yeah.
Yes.
I am not a we, but there are so many, Diane and I have been together for 35 years now. And so she's been on this journey with me, and I don't want to take credit for anything that is a we, because I couldn't have done, it would have been extremely difficult to try to do this alone.
I know you met her shortly before the court case, and your life kind of changed forever. Was she your primary support system through all of that?
Yeah, I met Diane in 1988, and it's because of her, I did not go to the Pentagon. I did not become a general. And it is because of her that I had this aha moment. And so she has been with me through all of this. And then I had my 4 sons who were extremely supportive. And when there was newspaper articles or something was coming up here locally, and we'd go to Costco or something, they would walk behind and sort of scan and see what if somebody recognized me, and at the same time they also were I had one of my sons was, when I was running for the House of Representatives from Washington State in 1998, one of my sons decided that he needed to be on my campaign so that they would see that we had family values also, and at the same time he could, be apprised of my welfare, because he's 6'7" and a big kid, and so they were always very supportive of me after I came out to them individually also.
Good. When gay marriage was legalized in the state of Washington, I know you and Diane were the first couple married in your county. How did that feel to finally get to have a legal marriage?
That was so much fun. It's like, I remember there were so many people when Apple has a new item out and people are sitting in front of the store in their chaise lounges waiting to get in. Well, we ended up having 10 weddings at our home, and so they all, on the same day, which was the first day that we were allowed to get married in Washington State, on the 9th of December. But I would do liaison with the office in Coupeville, where our government is here for Island County, and would check with them to make sure that they knew that there were people coming in, there were going to be gay marriage things. Is there anything that we need to do in advance, sort of to prep them on the fact that this was going to be a big deal. And so the morning of, Diane and I got outside in our chairs, sitting there in the cold, wanting to be the first people to go in and get the paperwork done. And the folks there had cookies waiting and coffee, and it was going to be a celebration from their perspective also. it was all so surreal in a way, but also that culmination of years of work to have our relationships validated. And it's not like the marriage was the pomp and ceremony type of thing with wedding dresses and stuff, but it was the legal paper to show that we were married and that we were protecting one another. And for years, while we were building up to marriage equality, was in a part of the gay community was saying, well, it really doesn't matter. We don't have to emulate what the heterosexual world does and all of this sort of stuff. Yet when the time came that we had the opportunity to protect our families, and that's sort of a generic term, people took it. And because it's not, I don't call Diane my wife, because to me, wife is a role. I call her my spouse. And that could be sort of a generational thing also, but I'd been a wife to a guy, and that's different from being a spouse with Diane. And it feels different. And so being able to be married felt different. Also, it was, it was different. And everyone I have spoken to about, what it felt like, and, it feels the same way, that getting married to your same sex partner was different from the experience of getting married in a heterosexual relationship.
How did it feel to have your sexuality and your relationship celebrated in that way after so many years of fighting just to be allowed to be yourself?
I think there's a sense of peace. And there's just feeling safe in a way that you don't always have the opportunity to experience. And whether it's trust and respect and love and all of those things combined, and then it's like, we're done the fighting now. And for us at our age, it's also that, it's the next fight hopefully will be on something else, but, realizing that we do have to protect ourselves, and what we have been able to achieve to not go the way of Roe and lose it all at the end. It's you got work to do, lady.
We're trying. Since you mentioned Roe, I know in an interview about a year ago, you expressed your fear of backsliding on marriage equality in the same way that Dobbs was a backslide on Roe. How do you feel today about the state of things?
Well, I think I think in December of last year, there was a bill that was passed, a law that was created to the Respect of Marriage Act. But the concern I have is the Supreme Court and their position on originalism, and how will that be twisted around in such a way that precedents that have been established all of a sudden are eliminated because we are a different society today. And it's very concerning. And what is also very reassuring is that you can have elections like we did a couple of days ago, where people are really concerned about their privacy and ability to make decisions, and that should not be in the hands of the government, but should be in the hands of individuals. And I don't know how how much more we can do to protect the gains that we have made, other than to make sure that people of like mind are the ones that are making the decisions in Congress. And so we really need to keep up the fight. Don't ever make any assumptions, because it does make an ass out of us.
Mm-hmm. Today in 2023, you do continue to fight for the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals. Is it decisions like Dobbs and other Supreme Court decisions that motivate you to do that?
Yeah, I think I believe that because of precedents that had been established in the past, and because even during various hearings that these justices of the Supreme Court decided that they were not going to abide by what they had originally said in the hearings about believing in precedents, and that really is disturbing, because even though you want to believe that common sense is going to prevail, and I'm wondering whether or not the impact of Dobbs is a wake-up call. Certainly it's a political wake-up call, but I wonder if it also is one that will motivate us to stay informed and to make sure that we get the appropriate, obviously, the appropriate people in Congress to keep those laws in place. But I think the other thing that has happened because of Dobbs is that we cannot rely on precedents. Mm-hmm. We have to make sure that the laws are there to protect those precedents, and that hasn't been done yet, and needs to be.
Right. Do you think if you had not faced your own experiences with discrimination in the past, that you would be the advocate you are today?
Oh, no. I think I would have just continued to do my job as a nurse. I think it may have come out that I was in a same sex relationship, but I learned a bit about advocacy having to be an advocate. Mm-hmm. But I think there's also the difference between being an activist or an advocate and living your truth and doing your job. Not mm-hmm. everyone needs to be out there on the streets waving signs. You can be an attorney who happens to be gay and known to be gay and out and do your job as an attorney. It doesn't mean that you're an activist, but it means that you happen to be an attorney who happens to be gay. Or you can be a doctor or a nurse or a teacher and things. And so I think that there is a real difference between the two. Mm-hmm. There are some people who live for advocacy and others who live for their jobs and happen to live their truth also.
Mm-hmm. In light of all that you've experienced, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
I think I think I would refer to trying to emulate my parents, my mother particularly, who during World War II was, taking a stand for the Norwegian, involved in the Norwegian resistance, and mm-hmm. standing up for the right thing, and always wondering if I would have been strong enough to do the same. And so when I have the opportunity, it's like, maybe this is as good as, or maybe standing up for what's right and speaking my truth and willing to take a stand has the equivalency. And so along the way, there have been instances, some were smaller while I was on active duty, but I think the biggest one was challenging the military's anti-gay policy, of which I am proud to have been a part.
Yes. And as a young queer woman, I can say we're very grateful for your efforts. That is all of the questions I had for today, but I really appreciate you being here with me and sharing your story. It's been amazing to hear from you, and I really do appreciate it.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for caring.